Welcome to a special episode of the Apple Insider Podcast. We're going to go even deeper on the iPad Pro and the 10th generation iPad because someone is on the show today who has them. And right now we can talk about the official review. Jason Aten, thank you for returning to the show.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a little while, but it's always a pleasure, though. I know that I only get invited when I have something to offer, but that's okay.
No, listen.
I'm just kidding.
First of all, you're a regular on the year in review episodes. And, I don't want to ask you too often to be on the show. And so, I figured once a year, it's not overextending yourself.
No, this is great. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the show. And it's great because you have the iPad Pro and the 10th generation iPad in your possession. You have a great review on Inc.com. It'll be a link in the show notes. And you talk about the camera on the iPad Pro placement. We're going to talk about that. We discussed all the announcements, Wes and I, on Friday's episode. But I thought this would be fun because you have the devices, you had an official review, and I can hear from you directly. And so I am correct, and you have both the 10th generation iPad and the new iPad Pro in hand, right?
Not only is that the case, I have so many iPads right now, Stephen. I actually have one in front of me of every size iPad that Apple makes. Just to be clear,
Does that include the mini?
I have an iPad mini in front of me. I have two older iPad Airs that are like the touch, button version or the home button version. I have the M1 iPad Air.
Right.
I have an M2 iPad Pro 12.9 inch, an M1 iPad Pro 11 inch, and a 10th generation iPad. So if I get a little confused, you're going to just have to bear with me.
Well, and this was something we talked about on Friday was when you look at Apple's current line, just what Apple sells, you can go to apple.com and buy any of these iPads right now. You have the $329 9th generation home button iPad, still for sale, brand new. You have the new 10th generation 10.9 inch iPad that's like the iPad Air, but not. You have the iPad Air M1, which is the third. You have iPad mini, that's a fourth model. The 11 inch iPad Pro, which is a separate thing from the 12.9 inch because the XDR mini LED screen did not come to the 11 inch. So each one is very, very slightly different in more and more awkward ways.
That's awkward ways. Yes, that's it right there.
So let's talk about the iPad 10th generation. We called it the 10.9 inch because this is like the regular base model iPad is in this weird situation where if you just say iPad, I feel like that's meaningless now. Like you can't just say iPad because it could mean so many different models. So the 10.9 inch, the 10th generation, well, there were lots of changes on this model, but the Apple Pencil is kind of like the weirdest situation. And so I imagine you got sent that. Did they send you one of those Apple Pencils and adapters too?
Yeah, so here was the funny thing that I didn't realize was going to be the case, but everyone was laughing about the size of the adapter. But the adapter is literally just a female-to-female plug, and you have to supply your own USB-C cable to connect to the device. And what I don't know for sure, because I have not, I could try it right now, but is I don't think, you can't actually use it while it's plugged in. Everyone's like, oh, it's like one of those pens at the bank where it's like connected to the wire
It's like
and
a
stuff
teller
like that.
bank.
No, you have to charge it up and then use it. And I had never used an original Apple Pencil before. I have a lot of these second generation ones because we've gone through a lot of iPads.
Right.
And those are like, you just snap it to the side and it pairs and it does all the things and it charges. This one, you have to it sends a pairing request when you connect it and you have to select pair and then do all the things and then it has to charge. And so very different experience, but yes, I do have one. I have one of the it looks ridiculous, but yes, I have one.
Well, and that's interesting because I saw the adapter and I didn't even talk about this on Friday's episode because I kind of assumed the adapter would just let you hang the pencil off like before, because when you have the first generation Apple Pencil, it's got the lightning connector on the back. You just stick it in, and then it looks like you have a spear sticking out of your iPad. You could injure someone very easily.
Yes.
And so I guess I assumed the adapter would just let you do that, but with the adapter in the middle, where USB-C would plug into the iPad, and then the lightning female connector would take the pencil in, and you could still have your spear. But so you need a cable to do that now.
Yeah, so the adapter is not, it's female to female. And so you don't plug the adapter into the iPad. You plug a USB-C cable into the iPad and then you plug it into one end of the adapter and then you plug the lightning jack that's on the end of it and you plug it into the other end of the adapter and there you go.
Jason, this is crazier than I realized. I did not realize. So basically, even if you get a brand new iPad 10th generation, you buy a new first generation Apple Pencil, which comes with this new adapter. So if you get a pencil today, I believe it comes with the USB-C to Lightning, both female adapters, but you actually cannot charge the pencil with the iPad in any way. Like you literally need another cable. Does the iPad come with a USB-C cable?
Yes, it did come with a USB-C to USB-C cable, so you could
Okay.
use that if you bought the Apple Pencil. But it is kind of wild, and I don't think. I mean, I was looking to try to find out, but I don't think Apple is making two of these versions of these adapters. I think that this is it.
No.
But I had heard first impressions from other people on podcasts talking about. This was before anyone had anything to review. Just, hey, did you see the adapter? It's like this, 2-meter long cable. And I'm like, I opened the box and I'm thinking, where did they put the cable in that tiny little box? I don't understand. But it does come in a completely separate box. It's not in with the Apple Pencil. It's a separate thing that, at least for the review units, that's how they sent it.
What's interesting is the first generation Apple Pencil, it actually did come with a female to female adapter before also, but it was just lightning to lightning. So if you wanted to charge your first generation Apple Pencil with a cable, you could, and that was in the box. You can put that adapter on the back of your Apple Pencil, and then you plug a lightning cable into it and you would charge it. This is a weird question. If you've never used a first generation Apple Pencil, you don't have this, but I'll be curious if you can go USB-C cable out of the iPad with a lightning on the other end, the USB-C to lightning cable, and then plug it into that old style lightning to lightning female to charge the Apple Pencil. I guess that would work.
What I don't know is if you may not be able to pair it that way. I don't know why I would say that,
I don't know.
but I feel like it's, I don't know. I will tell you, I did, you're welcome, try to plug the USB-C cable into an iPad Pro to see if I could pair the Apple Pencil, and it won't. It's like not supported.
It won't do it.
It's like, no, get that thing out of here. What are you talking about? We made a special one just for this device. You cannot use that antique thing.
Did you also get the Magic Smart Folio keyboard case?
Yes, which is the best thing that Apple has made for an iPad in quite a while.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because this thing, I like how it looks. It has function row keys, which I wish the Magic Keyboard did, but it really looks like it's not lappable. Like using it in your lap would be a challenge. How is that?
So it is less lappable. Can't believe I'm using that word. It is less lappable than a Magic Keyboard, right?
Sure.
Than the big thing. But it is more lappable than the Smart Folio keyboard. I think that's the right name. So it's kind of in between the two. Although I would argue that on that last point, it's a little bit more balanced if you have a long enough lap where you can put the kickstand out onto your leg, if that makes sense. I would try to do it right now while we're talking, but that's going to be a really bad podcast moment. So I'll skip that.
No, that's fun. We'll leave it for the YouTubers. But the Magic Keyboard Folio, that's the official name. It's $250. I do like that you can remove the tablet part, leave the keyboard behind, and you still have something on the back with the kickstand. I assume it's like infinite adjustment. Like, can you lean it back pretty far?
Oh yeah, it's like a Surface basically. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Surface tablets,
Yeah.
where you can just it'll probably go. Let's see, you can kick it up to maybe 85 degrees if you're staring at the back of it, so it's not infinite, but you can, which would put the iPad at
like the 120 degree angle.
Yes, it's not infinite, but there is more room than even the Magic Keyboard for that matter. So
in your review, you said. This is, let me get the exact quote here, because I find this interesting. I want to talk about the camera at length, but the camera I think is more connected to the iPad Pro conversation, which is like, why? But you said this iPad 10th generation is for most people the iPad they should buy. And I felt like, we talked about this on Friday, with this weird Apple Pencil situation and the M1 iPad Air only being, I say only, but it's $150 difference between this iPad and the iPad Air, and you get Apple Pencil 2 support, you get a better screen, and you get the ability to use a Magic Keyboard if you want, which I almost don't know if that's a benefit, because this new Magic Folio keyboard is pretty nice. Like, do you feel like it is a better for people to save the $150 and get this weird Apple Pencil situation with this iPad, or should people consider the iPad Air upgrade?
Okay, so you have to do a little bit of deducing here, because I think it's tough when you can't unknow the things that you already know. And people who listen to the Apple Insider podcast are, no offense, but they're not normal Apple consumers.
They're better than normal people. I'll agree.
They are 100% better than normal people,
That's right.
But they are much more sophisticated.
Sure.
That's why. And that's great.
Yeah.
But, there are 1.5 billion iOS devices, some more than that in the world. And And I've never seen the Apple Insider podcast numbers, but I don't think you get quite that many downloads.
It's a little less, just a
right.
hair.
So what I'm trying to say though is, for most people, I would be dramatically, like astronomically surprised if they're using an Apple Pencil at all. And the reason I think that that's true is that Apple put the worst Apple Pencil it's ever made with this new device, right? I think that if a lot of people were using the Apple Pencil on this device, then they would have figured out a different way to do this, unless they purely wanted it for like the upsell, which I don't know, maybe that's the case, but I don't think that a lot of people who are buying a sub $500 iPad could care even remotely less about the Apple Pencil.
So the original Apple Pencil launched September 2015. It is now 7 years old. And I guess my question would be, why didn't they, after 7 years, put USB-C on the back? I understand the $329 iPad is still out there with Lightning. Education is probably still going to buy that cheap one, which I also feel like is unfortunate. But either make they can't call it the second generation, which is weird. I feel like they kind of painted themselves in a corner calling the second generation Apple Pencil what they did. But I feel like they should have either put USB-C on the first generation or made new Apple Pencils. Maybe get away from distinguishing them by first and second generation and just call it like Apple Pencil and Apple Pencil Pro, put USB-C, and then I don't know. Do you think they should have done that?
I do have a lot of feelings about the Apple Pencils, and that I think that Apple took maybe the easy way out by not redesigning them. But I do also think that maybe that's an indication that they just did the math and said there's not enough people that will care enough for us to put that much effort into it. But I do think you touched on an important point. The fact that Apple is still selling the 9th generation iPad tells me, I mean, we have 4 young children, all of whom at one point in their life have had an iPad, with a home button, come home from school. Right. I think that the primary purchaser of those are either parents with young children or schools. And if you think about the number of those that are still in circulation and they all have Lightning ports, and how often do you think that the protrusion of a Apple Pencil gets snapped off, right? Like, and they end up having to replace those things. So I feel like they had to have a Lightning option still in the lineup, and that's the only reason they're still selling that device for whatever
$329, and education is $299, which is under. And I mentioned on Friday's episode, I have a friend who works in a public school district doing the iPad and IT stuff. He's literally has like hundreds of iPads he deals with, but they're also all like 3 years old.
Yep.
And that was one of my like consternations. Like, I feel like a year from now, I wonder what you think, that this 329 model will disappear. The new 10th generation will go down to $399. Education will be $349 pricing. And then that'll just be the base model iPad. And we finally move to USB-C, and schools will move like 4 years after that. But because that 329 model is still there, that's what schools will still buy. And it's just going to perpetuate the need for Lightning. And so I understand why that the first generation pencil is still there and what it's doing, but I don't know. I feel like Apple had an opportunity to kind of move the needle a little bit towards USB-C, which they did with the Apple TV remote and this base model iPad, but not this. So I don't know. I mean, are we like 1 year away maybe from losing Lightning on that?
I mean, your friend probably doesn't have hundreds of Apple TV remotes laying around like they have the iPads. But if you think about it, it's an interesting point, like that we as consumers, especially consumers of the devices that you and I use on a daily basis, we don't think about this, but that base model, that truly base model 329 iPad is an education device. And so is the M1 MacBook Air. Right. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is a corporate device that people, they keep those things around, not just because they're lazy, and it's because they have a huge audience for those devices. It's just not us.
Right. Okay, so it's going to be around for a while. So, I mean, overall, I mean, you've been using this for a few days compared to other base model iPads. How was the experience just using it?
It would be easy to think you're using an iPad Air, right? It's easy to just use it. And I mean, it has the A14 Bionic, which it's the most powerful tablet you can buy that is not also an iPad, is what I meant to say.
So the iPad mini has the same processor, right? They're both A15 now.
No, this is the A14 Bionic.
Was the A14? Oh, so the iPad mini is the A15.
Yeah, and so does the Apple TV for whatever reason.
I mean, I'm glad they update that because, I mean, I don't know. I wanted to make sure my Dolby Atmos is pumping the right way. So.
But if you think about it, they're still selling the iPhone 12, right? Which is the A14. And so they've just got to keep making those. They might as well stick them in this iPad, and
That is
it's a
true.
pretty decent upgrade. But I mean, we were using the iPhone 12 2 years ago, and it was the most powerful smartphone you can buy. Like this,
Right.
there's nothing inadequate about this iPad. The only thing and you can probably relate to this, that it kind of struck me at first that I didn't anticipate is that the base iPad doesn't have the more space option in the display like the pros do.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
everything looks like comically large
Huh.
to me. It's kind of a weird thing. And if it has it, I haven't found it anywhere, but I've looked in the place that it is on the other devices and it's just not there. So the things do kind of look a little bit funny to me, but other than that, there's nothing about this that is slow. It's capable of doing anything that someone who would be buying this device, they're going to be thrilled with it.
Is the non-laminated and non-P3 display noticeably different from the iPad Air M1?
For people who know what those words mean, maybe.
Sure.
If they're comparing them, it's kind of like the display resolution or the scaling that I just mentioned. If you're used to using that on an iPad Pro, for example, and you start using this, it's gonna be like, oh, that's different. But honestly, no one is gonna look at this and be like, oh, that display is terrible.
Yeah.
Is it as high quality? No. But do you honestly think that most people who are buying an iPad understand what laminated display even means?
That's
They have no idea.
I take your point. But if you were like, you have multiple children, I have multiple children, in that age bracket between like 10 and 13 or so, if you were buying a new iPad, not a refurbished one, which I think there's a whole argument to say like get a refurb iPad Air M1 and it might be a better value maybe, but like for your own kids, would you get this one or would you get them the iPad Air?
I would definitely get them this one.
Really?
Our boys currently one of them uses the non M1 iPad Air, so the last version before that still had a home button, and the other one uses an original iPad Air. I don't even know how old it is, but it still plays Minecraft, and that's all he cares about.
Fair.
So this would be a huge upgrade for them, and they would be able to play all the Minecraft that they could ever Minecraft on this device.
Right. Okay. And they don't care about the Apple Pencil so much.
You know, they wouldn't be able to tell you what this is called. It's like the white thing Dad uses when he's pointing at his screen.
It's a pointing device.
They would be really entertained if I could use it connected to this adapter. They'd think, what is Dad doing?
Right. That looked like a weird thing.
He's apparently signing his mortgage. I don't know.
So the big change also, and we will connect this then to the iPad Pro, is the front-facing camera moved to the landscape long side of the iPad, which most of the time I feel like most people use an iPad in landscape, horizontal, and the camera being in that middle of the horizontal long side makes more sense. If you're using it in a Magic Keyboard, this new Magic Keyboard Folio, like it belongs there. And so before we rant about the iPad's non-changed placement, do you find having it there in the middle of the iPad actually makes an improved experience when you use the camera?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay.
It is where the camera belongs on these devices. I think there are two types of iPads. There are iPads you should use in landscape orientation, and then there's the iPad mini when you're reading a book and you hold it the other way. Like that's it.
Yes.
That's the only device. The iPad mini is the only iPad where it is acceptable for any length of time to hold the device in portrait orientation. And so it's ridiculous that the camera continues to be in the spot that it is in. And so if you're using FaceTime, if you're using Zoom, like I think that maybe what happened is that Apple looked at whatever the telemetrics and said, well, not very many people are using Zoom on iPad, so we don't really have to move the camera. And I'm like, but there's a reason no one is using Zoom on their iPad, because the camera makes it. I mean, it's like looking at my nose. Like, why is it over there? And if I look
that angle,
and if I look at anyone on the screen, people think like, why is he not paying attention?
it is noticeably, yeah. So we're in the current placement on the new 10th gen iPad, it's improved. Like the whole experience. Yeah.
It's where it's supposed to be. It makes perfect sense. You can look at your display and be looking at the camera at the same time. It's good for FaceTime. It does have center stage still, which I feel like the reason they introduced center stage was to make up for the fact that the camera's in the wrong spot. But here you get both of those things. You get center stage, right, which to be honest is still useful if you are setting an iPad on a desk or something and you have a couple people
sure
talking to grandma on a FaceTime call or whatever. It still makes a lot of sense, but it's where the camera is supposed to be finally.
This episode is brought to you by iMazing. iMazing is the Swiss Army knife of iOS device management for Mac and Windows that delivers unparalleled access to features and capabilities that Apple doesn't provide. iMazing gives you powerful local backup solutions for iPhone and iPad, including support for Time Machine-like snapshots and automatic backups over Wi-Fi. iMazing lets you effortlessly transfer music between your iOS device and computer without limitation. That's a big deal. And it's the best way to move files from your computer to your iPhone or iPad with quick transfer. And that's a free feature of iMazing. One-click drag and drop is all it takes to get any file into any iOS-supported app on your device. Plus, you can even browse and export iPhone messages or WhatsApp conversations to a PDF, Excel, or plain text for safekeeping or compliance purposes. I've used iMazing many times, especially when dealing with older devices, trying to help friends and family get some data off of those devices. Maybe it's like completely full of storage and you can't even update the software. iMazing is a great tool for that. Plus, there's advanced tools for geeks and developers like extract log files, view the device's real-time console, open and browse system files and app sandboxes, and a ton more. iMazing is constantly updated with new features crafted in Switzerland by Apple fans who enjoy supporting the latest iOS, iPadOS, and macOS features. Try it free and learn more at iMazing.com. That link is also in the show notes. Learn more and try it for free at iMazing, the letter I, M-A-Z-I-N-G, iMazing.com. Our thanks to iMazing for sponsoring this episode and our friends at Kolide. If you're considering a third-party audit like SOC2, then you should be prepared to answer some tough questions about endpoint security. Auditors want to know that you have a system in place to monitor and maintain compliance across your fleet, which means showing that your employees are using things like disk encryption, screen lock, and password managers. If you're not quite sure how to go about doing that, you need to try Kolide. Kolide is endpoint security for Mac, Windows, and Linux devices that does things mobile device managers can't and gives you the visibility you need for third-party and internal compliance goals. Best of all, Kolide doesn't resort to surveilling employees or locking down devices. Instead, it works with end users to resolve issues and relies on their cooperation and informed consent. That's a big deal. A lot of times, employees at a company might feel like they don't have the full use of their devices because MDMs have locked down features. Well, don't do that. You can use Kolide. They send Slack messages directly to employees, giving them instructions on how to comply and better practices for privacy and security. So meet your security goals, pass your audit without compromising on privacy. Visit kolide.com/AppleInsider to find out how. And if you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag just for activating a free trial. That's KOLIDE.com/AppleInsider. Kolide.com/AppleInsider. The link is also in the show notes. Our thanks to Kolide for sponsoring this episode.
But I want to say one more thing about the 10th gen iPad,
Oh, sure.
specifically the Magic Keyboard Folio.
Yeah.
I was surprised by this. One of the things I thought was going to be very appealing about this would be I stopped using my Magic Keyboard with my 11-inch iPad Pro. I love the Magic Keyboard, but it is heavier than my MacBook Air when I stick it on my iPad Pro. Yeah. And so I thought, this is great. Now they've reduced a lower profile case. I don't know why they didn't make it for all of the devices, but yay. But when you compare an iPad 10th gen with this Folio to an iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard, it's actually thicker than the iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard. It is not a lot, but it is actually thicker. And if you think about it, the keyboard itself part is probably the same, right? Yeah, and then the backing is a little bit thicker because it's got a kickstand. The only difference is, I think, I did not do the math. It feels heavier, but it feels a little bit less dense. And I think that's because the hinge is obviously very different, right? There's no charging in the hinge. It's literally just the smart connector magnets and a piece of rubber. So that, I think it loses some of that weight there. But I will tell you that, it's great that the keyboard comes off of it, but I don't think you'd want to sit and hold the iPad with the back case for very long because it's probably 50% of the weight of the iPad.
So it is, but is it lighter? Is the Magic Keyboard Folio lighter than the Magic Keyboard?
I think it's pretty darn close. If it is any lighter, I should have I should have weighed the two. I'm doing the thing that doesn't actually work where you hold them in one hand. Yeah, and it doesn't work. But I would say that they feel almost the same. But it doesn't feel much lighter if it is.
There is this funny page now where I'll put this in the show notes, but it's select iPad keyboard page. And it shows the Magic Keyboard Folio, top left. That's the new product. Its compatibility is exactly one iPad, the 10th generation.
Yep.
The Magic Keyboard. And I guess this never hit me, but I guess the moniker Magic equals trackpad. If something is magic, it has a trackpad, unless it's the Magic Mouse. But we won't go there.
Trackpads are
Trackpads
magic.
are magic.
I mean, Apple's trackpads are really good, though.
They're incredible. No, I love it. But then you have the Magic Keyboard, which is the floating iPad, and that's available for iPad Pro and iPad Air. And then you have the Smart Keyboard, which is for the 10.5-inch iPad Pro from years ago, the old iPad Air, and everything up to the 9th generation iPad. And then you have the Smart Keyboard Folio, which is for the iPad Pro newer generations and the iPad Air newer. So if you want something without a trackpad, you can get the Smart Keyboard Folio. But if you want with a trackpad, it's a little confusing. I'm not sure with Folio.
If you want the magic, you have to pay more if you want the magic.
Pay more for magic, which equals trackpad.
And really the only difference between the Smart Keyboard and the Smart Keyboard Folio, if I remember, is that the Smart Keyboard did not cover the entire back. And it was the one that you had to like do an origami, goose or something or swan in order to get the keyboard to come out from the other side of the device.
I do remember that. I really did used to like, I think it's the Smart Keyboard Folio, which was basically the keyboard without the trackpad. I used it with my iPad Pro, but it was so light and thin. And the keyboard, it was that like weird material. The keys weren't really like separate, and so it did feel kind of mushy sometimes. But I loved how light and thin it was, and it never felt cumbersome. And now, people have been asking me, I'd be curious your thoughts. Like, I want to buy an iPad. I want to get a Pro or maybe an Air. Like, what should I get? And when I think about the 12.9-inch iPad Pro with a Magic Keyboard, I have to tell people, like, I think twice about taking it with me. Like when I had an 11-inch with the Folio keyboard, I took it everywhere. I took it to coffee shops, I took it traveling, whatever, like use it in the cars. I wait for the kids' rehearsal, like whatever. Like I would use it everywhere. But the 12.9-inch with Magic Keyboard, I feel like it's the same decision as do I want to bring my laptop, which is the point. Like it's supposed to be a laptop replacement, but it's heavy. It feels thicker than my 14-inch MacBook Pro. And then I have the thought, do I just take my 14-inch MacBook Pro and leave the iPad Pro behind with the Magic Keyboard because it's so heavy and weird? Like, I feel like it is if someone was going to get one iPad to rule them all and didn't have multiple sizes, they're just getting one. They have the funds. They want to get like a Pro model. Which do you recommend people get in that situation in light of all these new iPads?
I do just have to say, I really like that callback because the very first episode of Apple Insider, we talked about Mordor. I don't know if you remember that, but we did have a Lord of the Rings reference then, and that was fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, that was a good callback.
I did mention, though, that I stopped using the Magic Keyboard with my iPad Pro.
Right.
I use the Smart Folio keyboard.
Oh.
That's what I use most of the time with it. I also have the just Smart Folio, which is what you would think it's the Smart Folio, but without the keyboard, right? It's the exact same form factor. It just doesn't have buttons on the part that goes across the screen when you fold it out.
Right.
And if I'm going to take my iPad somewhere where it's going to be in my backpack, then I will just take it with the Smart Folio keyboard because then I can pull it out and I can still use it.
Yeah.
And on an airplane, that's compact enough that you can actually still type and you can still work. And I mean, it's going to be close enough that I can just touch the screen. It has a touch screen, so I don't actually need the trackpad sometimes. I can just, touch the screen. And so that works great.
It works that way too.
Yeah. But at home, I'll use the Magic Keyboard, but the Magic Keyboard is like an accessory I go get out of a drawer because I have a specific use case for it. It's just not a portable thing for me anymore. Yeah. And the review unit I have is the 12.9 with the Magic Keyboard, and like that won't even leave my desk. Forget it. I'm not carrying that around.
You know what? You have me thinking now. I wonder if I want to get that Folio for my 12.9-inch M2 iPad Pro that I have coming on Wednesday because I do miss how thin and light that was, and it prevents me, like the Magic Keyboard itself sometimes prevents me from bringing it because it's just cumbersome. So the other new device, we have the M2 iPad Pro. The updates are pretty minimal. Again, we talked about on Friday, like the Apple Pencil Hover, the new M2 chip, better camera video recording. I don't think I have ever recorded video on my iPad Pro. I've taken like 2 pictures.
You should not.
Yeah, you should not.
Yeah.
Although Apple had like this amazing contraption in their like announcement video showing an iPad Pro in this like rig, and they're using like cinematic. I don't know about that. Like I don't think anybody does that.
No.
The camera on the iPad Pro notably did not change, and now there's lots of reasons, supposedly. Number one, the Apple Pencil 2nd generation charges there. And so there has to be magnets. There has to be a way to charge the Apple Pencil there. And so if the camera is there, then the magnets and charging can't be there. I feel like Apple's pretty good at hardware design. I feel like they probably could find another solution. We talked about a couple options Friday, like maybe put it on the other longs, like maybe charge the Apple Pencil on the bottom edge and redesign the Magic Keyboard slightly. So when you close it, it affords a pencil in there. Maybe some other like indention or divot on that other side. So, and listen, third party case manufacturers are going to accommodate whatever Apple does. So Apple doesn't have to worry about that. But I mean, what do you think they should have done? Because the camera didn't move and it belongs on the long side.
I think that Apple makes the iPad and Apple makes the the Apple Pencil. And so if they really wanted to solve this problem, that they could have, and they didn't. So that tells me one of two things. One, that they didn't want to change that many things, right? Because they made a decision, right? Product design is all about decisions, and they made a decision about what they felt like was the most important. And I think, and I have asked Apple this, I really haven't gotten an answer, but I think, so I'm working off some assumptions that on the Pro iPads, and I guess this would be true of the iPad Air because you can use the Magic Pencil. However, we really can't say that for sure because the iPad Air hasn't been updated since, the last time it was updated. But I think that in their minds, Apple believes that more people who are using Pro iPads care about the pencil than they do about where the camera is. That might be true. I have no idea. But I think that they could have solved this, especially on the 12.9, because I can actually attach the Apple Pencil to the 12.9, like, and align it with one end of the long side.
Right.
Because there's more than one magnet up there already.
Right.
So but I think what would have had to happen is, in order to do that, they would have had to have the Apple Pencil 3. And they just weren't ready to do that because I don't think that they felt like enough people cared. I personally think it's absurd that the device that has Pro in the name has a worse front-facing camera than basically it's not technically the entry level model, but it basically is the least expensive, new iPad that you can buy. So I think I think they made the wrong choice.
Yeah, and I agree. I think Pro users probably do care more about the pencil than camera placement, but that's not to say that no one cares about the camera placement, because there are times, especially when Zoom was being real shady with like kernel installation and stuff. They've updated and they've changed their practices on how they install on a Mac. But there was a time there where I was like, you know what, I'm just going to use Zoom on my iPad because it's sandboxed and I don't have to worry about any of that weird stuff. But whenever I would use it on my iPad, the camera was weird. And so even if you only use it a few times a year, it would be nice to have a good experience of the camera in the middle. And like I said Friday, Apple is pretty good at hardware engineering and design. Like, they could probably solve it. Now, Wes thinks that maybe a future Apple Pencil will remove the magnetic wireless charging and go back to some kind of port, and then Apple will move the camera then. I feel like there's probably a better option, like the bottom edge, and accommodate it with a different kind of case. I mean, what do you think the long-term plan might be for Apple to do that?
I'm not an engineer, but I think they could have solved this pretty easily if they thought it was a high enough priority. And just to be honest, my article basically was that there's a glaring problem that existed in the past and that they didn't solve that problem. But the thing about it to me makes it such a glaring problem is not that the camera's still in the wrong spot, but that Apple could have solved it, but just didn't because they didn't think it was a high enough priority, right? To me, that actually is a bigger thing because I feel like they made a decision to keep the experience. And if they hadn't moved it on the other iPad, it probably wouldn't seem like such a big deal.
Right.
But they've clearly acknowledged that the place where this camera belongs is on the long side. They how we know? Because they moved it on one of the iPads and they called it the landscape right ultra wide camera. Like, they gave it a name. It's an actual thing. And when you look at the MacBook Pro, when you look at the iPhone Pro, the Pro has always meant you get all of the best features. There are no features on the iPhone that you don't get on the iPhone Pro. Right? There are no features on the MacBook Air that you don't get in the MacBook Pro. Technically, the MacBook Air has the M2, but we all know that it's coming because they were updated at different times. Right. Apple would never update the MacBook Pro and give it less than what the MacBook Air has. And so the iPad Pro just got updated at the same time as the non-Pro iPad, and the non-Pro got a better feature than the iPad Pro got. And I think that, to me, it doesn't make any sense. I think that the way they solve this is Apple Pencil 3 comes out sometime next year. I don't know. I mean, the reason it's a bummer is that the iPad Pros seem to be on like an 18-month update cycle, which just means we're going to have to live with this for another year and a half. And I'm sure Apple will solve it because, again, they've acknowledged that that's where this camera goes. I think that they were just catering to like, okay, well, most people who are doing FaceTime with grandma are buying this iPad, so we're just going to fix it on this one.
Right.
But I really hope that Apple Pencil, and here's the way you can solve it. Like Apple Pencil 3 charges with MagSafe. Like it wouldn't be hard for them to have two magnets that just line it up on the edges of a MagSafe puck and charge it that way. Like you don't have to put, please, I hope Wes is wrong. Please don't put a port back on it. Just wireless charging is fantastic, but just, this doesn't seem like it's that hard of a problem. It just was hard enough that it wasn't worth it to Apple for the number of people that they thought would care. It just happens that some of the people who care talk on podcasts and write articles and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I also don't hope they go back to a port. I like the wireless charging. I mean, it's a much cleaner look just for the pencil itself, but just more convenient, to be able to just tap it on the top. And then also, I'll go back and forth between my iPad mini and my iPad Pro, and it's really convenient. Just tap the pencil on the side and let it connect for a second, and now it's paired with that iPad. With a port, I mean, yes, it would still be quick, but I think less convenient. And then you got that weird cap on the end, which my kids have lost innumerable number of caps for the first generation Apple Pencil.
I've already lost one, and I've only had this thing for like a day. A week.
Wait, you lost one of Apple's?
Shh.
Okay,
I'll find it. There's a UN chip in it, right? I can just make it make noise or something.
I wish. Yeah, I wish. So with the M2 chip, this is not a very updated iPad Pro, even after 18 months. The last one was the M1. It came out April 2021. I bought that on launch, and now it's about 18 months later, M2. Besides the Apple Pencil Hover, have you got a chance to try that at all? Any apps that support it?
Yeah, I mean, I spent most of the time just using the Notes app. Procreate also supports it. And it is actually useful. I thought it was kind of a gimmick, but it is kind of useful. In Procreate, one of the ways that it's most useful is that when you have the iPad in the hover state, it will show you your brush or your pen, and it'll show you both, the diameter and the opacity. And traditionally, the way that you would change those things is you'd have to go over to the sliders on the left-hand side. But when you have the iPad in hover mode, you can actually just pinch to which is cool. Change the size or move your finger up and down. So it's kind of like a double finger, gesture that you can use. One of those fingers just happens to be the Apple Pencil at that point. So that's a really unique thing that goes just beyond the hover. The thing that I couldn't quite get Apple to talk about is why the older versions couldn't do this, because they do actually have a hover text. There's an accessibility feature with the Apple Pencil that does something similar with text, where you can hold it over the text. And so clearly there is some proximity sensing that's already happening. And so I don't know, there's probably some kind of a technical limitation. That's what they always say. But I would love to see that it's the same Apple Pencil, and it's, as we said, it's basically the same. I can't imagine they put something different in. There's no new display layer. Come on.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, there's no new sensors in the display. So it seems weird that the M2 would be the deciding factor for a hover state. Like, it doesn't seem like it'd be super processor intensive.
No. And I mean, there is, the graphics is the biggest improvement according to Apple. I mean, I don't do anything on an iPad to confirm that. I'm sure I'll just take their word for it that the graphics of the M2 over the M1 is the biggest improvement, but this is not a graphics intensive thing that they're doing.
Gotcha. Now, you said in your interview, the M2 is at times a noticeably improved speed experience over the M1. Where did you see that kind of play out?
And this was a hard thing for me at first to quantify, because anytime you use a brand new device, you're like, wow, everything just feels really snappy. This is wonderful. I'm opening my Photos app and everything is there. But I did do, I'm not like somebody who does
the benchmarks,
in-depth testing, benchmarks and stuff. But here's the workflow I do all the time. I take a ton of photos, either with my camera, meaning my iPhone, or I've got a Nikon mirrorless camera, and I shoot RAW. Those are all huge files. I loved actually editing them on the iPad because I just connect the SD dongle to it, load them all into Lightroom. It's great because I can use the Apple Pencil, not the old one, the new one, I guess they're both old ones at this point, but the less old one.
Yeah, they're both 2018. I mean, it's 4 years old too.
And so applying those types of changes, it felt faster. And to me, since it's something I do all the time, if it feels faster, I give it that credit. I can't quantify that in terms of a measurement, which is why in my review I put if this is something that matters to you, speed, processing power, then you will notice it. There are a lot of things we can notice, and especially for exporting those files. Again, I didn't time it,
Sure.
but it's like stuff that I'm like, oh, this is taking a minute, and then like, oh, it's done, right? And so it was more of a feel type thing. Like it's very unscientific for me, but it's like real world. I think that's more useful though for people because very few people actually care. We had this problem with when they introduced the M2, MacBook Airs, where people are like benchmarking things, and we're like, no one actually cares about this in real world use. So what are we actually talking about here? But if the experience is actually better because of it, then I want to just kind of call that out. And my experience, especially with things like photo, and the reason I throw that out there is even though most users may not be shooting 48 megapixel RAW on an, mirrorless DSLR type style camera and then importing them from an SD card, they do shoot lots of photos with their iPhone. Right. So anything that you can do better in Lightroom is going to just be better in your Photos app, and sharing them and doing that kind of stuff just seem to work a lot quicker. One of the challenges that I sometimes have is moving things between like Dropbox and iCloud or the on the device files, or taking things from the Photos app and moving them to Drop. Like those types of things always seem to take a little longer than they should on the iPad. And on the M2 version, I just felt like, wow, this, like, it's all just working. So I know it's not very scientific, but
no, it's good. I'm curious. We haven't talked about this because we haven't talked since last year, but what do you think or feel about Stage Manager?
Yeah.
And how is that playing out on the M2?
Yeah. So I will say that it is better on the M2, but the caveat for me there is I'm using a 12.9 inch M2. And it's much better on the 12.9 inch iPad than it is on the 11 inch iPad, because the drawback for using Stage Manager is that there's all this extra UI around your content or around the thing you're actually doing, but you have more space for that on the M2. I do feel like the windows resized a little bit less chaotically on the M2, but again, I want to be careful about, like, that's why I didn't include much about, I wrote about Stage Manager recently, and I didn't include much of that in this review because there was, like, I couldn't do a controlled A to A type experiment with this, because also, like, well, I didn't even look, but what is this device even running? Right? Is it running the same version? It's got to be running the production, the
16.1,
the release version. Yeah, it's got to be running the release version. And so, and I wasn't running, I had stopped updating the betas at this point on my iPad because it just would start making me more mad. So,
yeah, okay. I mean, I got one. Like I said, Friday. It was more so because my wife is using an iPad Pro from like 5-6 years ago. I'm not sure, and so she's gonna get my M1 12.9 inch. I'm gonna get the new M2. I like our listeners know, maybe they don't, but I edit all my podcasts on iPad. I'm hoping to see some slight difference in M2 speeds, maybe just like exporting or saving the MP3 files. Sometimes doing live effects like compressor and equalizer can be processor intensive, so that'd be nice. And Ferrite, the app that I use, the developer's name is Canis. The company is Wooji Juice. He's going to try and support the hover thing. He says there might be some already. And I guess that would be another question for you. Were there any apps that were able to take advantage of the hover without like specific updates? Or do you really have to have, like kind of it built into whatever app?
First, I just want to call. You just wanted to say Wooji Juice, so
anytime it's a really good name.
Wooji Juice,
It's a good name.
I give you credit for that. That's good. But as you were talking, I was not paying attention because I got stuck on Wooji Juice. But I was just like moving the Apple Pencil around the interface, around the screen, and hovering to see what happens. Is there anything that'll do anything? And so, for example, if you just hover over the dock, it animates the icons, your app icons, and it's almost like the
magnify.
Yeah, it's like the magnify on the dock on a Mac, which everyone apparently hates, but you can it just does that. Not a lot, but it does it. I kept holding it there thinking maybe if I hold it long enough it'll give me
like open or like
a contextual menu, but it doesn't do that. But like it's not a native thing. I think the developers have to add support for it. Like I'm in Lightroom right now, and like
nothing happens.
It's not doing anything. And even if I go to the brushes, there's no hover happening with the brush, in advance of me doing it. So it's something that the developers actually have to add.
Is there anything besides Notes where you found hover was like useful in Apple's first party apps?
Not at this point. I mean, Notes is the most obvious place to use your Apple Pencil for something other than pointing and tapping, right? Like everything else, if you're using it, it's because you don't have a mouse and you're too lazy to, stretch your finger 2 more inches because you still have to hold your hand up there.
Wow.
I don't know. I don't know. It's not like a super useful thing unless you're actually drawing or writing.
Or editing podcasts, Jason. Editing podcasts. It's amazing.
That's true. I've been using Ferrite more. And so I would agree with you on that. That's a super niche application, I think, especially for someone doing it on an iPad mini. I can see why you need it on an iPad mini because I can't touch anything on that. My fingers are so fat that it just happened to hit everything. If I tried to edit a podcast, it would just be a big jump. I might as well have like an easy button and just be like, you just decide what to do.
Well, the thing, I'm torn because I like the iPad mini for its lightness and like palm ability. Earlier we had lap ability.
Yeah.
I'm talking like palm ability because I can't edit a podcast with the iPad on a stand or in the Magic Keyboard because then my hand is like,
up in the air,
elevated and doing that. It's like Steve Jobs said, no one wants to hold their hand up and touch a screen.
Yeah.
So I don't want to do that. So I need to hold the iPad to edit, but holding the 12.9-inch iPad, even though it's a beautiful screen with ProMotion and I can see every detail of the waveform as I'm editing, like I get like strain, in my hand as I'm trying to hold it, which the iPad mini, I can barely feel that I'm holding it. It's so light. And so basically what I want is the impossible product of the beautiful 12.9-inch XDR mini LED display with ProMotion with the lightness and size of the iPad mini. That's all I want.
Do you find that ProMotion and XDR mini LED displays are really helpful in editing audio podcasts?
Well, I know it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but ProMotion, actually, I do notice it because when I go on my iPad mini, I don't know if you've ever watched like my editing live videos. Like I have like one of them up, but I'll scroll very quickly back and forth because I edit as it plays. And so I'm like swiping over farther in the track and deleting things before the playhead even gets there. And so like I'm moving back and forth pretty quickly. And on the iPad mini, it can be a little jarring because it's just a blur and my eyes can't really track it as much. But on the iPad Pro with ProMotion, when I do that swiping back and forth, there is not as much blur because it is, tracking more like 120 hertz. And I do prefer it visually when I'm doing that kind of editing. Obviously for color and stuff, I mean, I notice that in Lightroom because I'll edit a photo every once in a while when I want to take a picture of my Apple Watch Ultra or something. But, the color stuff doesn't matter as much for editing podcasts. But I do like the ProMotion, and that will never come to iPad mini.
If only they made a iPad with ProMotion that was a half pound lighter than the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. Well, I think they have an 11-inch version.
But then you don't get the mini LED. And if I want to get a Pro, I know. And I did edit on the 11-inch. I had the 2018 11-inch iPad Pro all the way up until last year with the XDR mini LED screen. And I got it because I wanted that screen. I wanted the LED. I wanted to see how good it looks. And it looks amazing. It looks incredible. Also, when watching stuff, like just watching a TV show or movie, like it looks amazing. But the 11-inch, I think, that's why when people ask me now, like, what's one iPad I should buy? I typically say, get the 11-inch iPad Pro. Like, portability-wise, weight, if you're ever going to hold it and do anything with Apple Pencil, I think the 11-inch is a better product for that kind of use case. But
I think you're absolutely right. I think for a lot of people, probably the iPad Air is still a great option.
Yeah.
I always ask people, like, I'm thinking of getting an iPad. What should I get? And I'm like, well, how many hours a day do you expect to use it? I'm just going to occasionally watch Netflix give it to my kid to play a game. Like, then get the base model or the iPad Air, right? Like nobody who's doing that should spend $1,000 on an iPad. But I agree with you that even my review is like, I have long felt like the 11-inch iPad Pro was one of the best devices that Apple ever made.
Yeah.
And it is weird that it's limited in the display compared to the 12.9-inch. I have no idea what the story is there, but maybe they just felt like it's not big enough to blow your eyeballs out or something like that. I'm not really sure. Maybe it doesn't have a big enough battery to support all those extra lit up pixels. But yeah, so they just got to do something about the camera.
Final thoughts. You've had these iPads for a couple of days. Any part of the experience using it that stood out or that you want to mention, or buying recommendations?
Yeah, so I will say, and I tried to make this point, I did go on about the camera, and I do feel strongly about it. But I will say that what I really wanted to...
Your exact title, by the way, you say there's one glaring problem with the new iPad Pro, and you are referring to the camera.
Yes, and that's and I feel like I stand behind that because what I wanted to write about this is like nothing has changed about people were giving the iPad Pro a hard time because, hey, look, the base model, you got a complete redesign. And I sometimes think like, why did you want Apple to redesign this product that's basically almost perfect, right? What did you want them? Did you just want them to change it because you're bored? But the thing is, like, that's not a very good business case for completely redesign. Sure. The same thing happened with the Apple Watch, right? Like people wanted flat sides. Why? Because I'm bored with my Series 6 or whatever. Like, right. Most people are still wearing a Series 3. So like, no, Apple's not catering to that at this point. So the iPad Pro is exact. I mean, there's no way you could possibly tell the difference between 2018 iPad Pro and a 2022 iPad. You just would not be able to tell the difference unless you started looking in the settings app for what was inside of it. It's just not, they look the same. And that's great because they did not change any of the things that did not need to be changed. They just missed the one thing that did. Right. And so I feel like it's actually good that they didn't make a lot of changes. I think that that's important. I don't think Apple should be redesigning its products just for the sake of redesigning them. And it's different than the iPhone, where I do think that there is an element of Apple's design ethos that says every so often we do need to change the design because we need people to buy new iPhones every 3 years.
Sure.
That the iPad is not that, right? It is for you and I maybe, but it's not that way for most people. Like I said, my son is still rocking an original iPad Air. I don't know how old that is. It's like what, 2012, 13? It's old.
It's old.
And it works fine for Minecraft as long as he plugs it in after 25 minutes. But for most people, I do think I've never recommended the base iPad before. I always recommended the iPad Air.
Yeah.
I think that that's changed this year. I think that the base iPad, the 10th generation iPad, is a great device. The only thing that annoys me is that the bezels are a little bit thicker, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that has something to do with the camera. Maybe that's the other reason they couldn't put the camera there, is because the bezel's a little bit thicker on the side. But that's only going to bother somebody who is used to what Apple likes to call all screen display, which it's not, but that's fine.
That is interesting. Yeah. So the original iPad Air came out November 1st, 2013. You're very close. That's pretty good.
Yep. And we bought one on November 2nd, probably.
And, when it comes to the iPad specifically, design wise, it is a big piece of glass that is already very, very thin. And I mean, even 10 years from now, I guess the bezels could go away completely. Although if it's a tablet, you probably want to hold it sometimes. And to hold it, you need some kind of bezel. So you're not tapping the screen, just holding it. So I do think 4 or 5 years without a redesign. I mean, aside from making the bezel even smaller, which would give even more reason not to have a camera on the front at all. Like if there's not enough bezel to put that, I don't think under display cameras are going to be around anytime in the next couple of years. It's just, that's the design. Like that, it's a big piece of glass. It's a big screen.
Yeah, I mean, look how long it took to redesign the MacBook Air. I know it's had some incremental changes, like when they went to the Retina, but it took a very long time for the MacBook Air to have a significant design language change. And I don't like we're gonna have that for 10 years probably, because I don't know unless they find a way to make it so you can take the thing off and make it take the display off or something. But then it's an iPad, so I don't know.
Last question, because this was a rumor late last week. Every once in a while, people say oh yeah, macOS is going to come to the iPad. I stand by, that's balderdash. I don't think macOS is ever going to come to the iPad. What do you feel about that?
I don't know if I'd use the word balderdash. I like that word though. It's laughable balderdash. I don't know. But I would agree. I mean, I think it would be delightful if you could run macOS on your 12.9 inch iPad Pro. I mean, I think that would be like a cool experience. I've used a Surface and it's actually a great experience, to be honest. There are some, I mean, except for the fact that it runs Windows, but aside from that, it's a great experience compared to running Windows on any other device that runs Windows.
Yes.
It's just nice to be able to have like the full capabilities. I think though that Apple very much thinks of the iPad as a just different device that people use to do different things. It is not a computer replacement, even though I think a lot of people use it as their primary device. Oh, yeah. And when I say a lot of people, I do not mean people like you and I mean like my mom, her computer is an iPad Air,
right? Because
she uses it for FaceTime and email and checking, going online and buying, tickets to the, Vienna Christmas market cruise or something like that.
Oh, that's very nice.
She does, those are the things that she does with it, and she doesn't need a MacBook to do that, right? And she saved herself probably $500 or $600.
Yeah.
And but that's different. Like she's not editing podcasts, and if she was, I guess she could, use Ferrite, but she doesn't need the things that you would use a Mac for.
Right.
She doesn't need that kind of control over the software. So I would agree with you that it's just, I don't think it's going to happen. And I also don't think it needs to happen.
No, I agree. I mean, my only pain point is sometimes when I want to do something on a website like Squarespace to make a change on a website, just the iPad Safari will not do it. Like just Squarespace will not cooperate, and weird things like being able to drag and drop certain things. I have to go to a computer. And sometimes those situations, again, very niche cases, they are pro cases. You're supposed to do it on a computer anyways. So, but I even then do not think I wish I had macOS on this or want it. And like your mom, my parents, they had a 2008 MacBook Pro until like a year ago, and they wanted to get a new computer. And I said, don't get a computer, get an iPad Pro. I got them because I wanted them to have the big screen because they like making the text big. And having an iPad as their main deal, they can print from it. They can do all the web browsing and bill paying and email checking and photos. And it's way easier, way less technical issues will arise as opposed to if they had a Mac, like they're going to have questions. Like they're going to have issues with either system preferences or some weird thing in the background. Like it is just a better experience to have iPad OS on an iPad and use it for their main computer. And there's a lot of people where that also would work.
I agree completely. I feel like they could solve the problem that you described of Safari doesn't do things by just making Safari better. You don't need Mac OS. There's no reason to put Mac OS on there just to fix Safari. Like just fix Safari. Make it so that if I go to a website that it behaves the same way it does on a desktop. Like that should not, that's like, again, Apple has a lot of really smart people.
Yeah.
It's just about priority. And so far that hasn't risen far enough up the, request stack for them to actually devote enough effort to it.
Yeah.
But like that's the kind of thing I would love to see, quote, Mac OS apps on the iPad have more functionality, but I don't think you actually need Mac OS to do that.
Which I forgot to ask you, of all the things, DaVinci Resolve is coming to iPad. You have LumaFusion, you have the Adobe suite of apps. Why? Why not Final Cut? Did you ask them about Final Cut?
I did not ask about Final Cut, but I will say this. I do think that sometimes, Apple's a very big company, and it's not like the M2 caught anybody by surprise. Right? We have an M1 version, we're updating it. We're not going to just keep the M1 version, and they can't put an M1 Pro or an M1 Max or an M1. No. That'd be insane. Could you imagine an M1 Ultra and an iPad?
It would need a fan.
It would need a fan. It would need an external fan. You just have to stick it in front of your air conditioning vent.
You just get a USB-C female to Lightning, and then you get a Lightning powered fan.
And you would need an 18 gauge cable plugged into the wall just to keep the thing running. But anyway, that's fine. But I just think that inside of Apple, they look at these things very differently than people like you and I who spend a lot of time talking to people who are very similar to us, right? I think, and so we think it'd be like amazing to have Final Cut on an iPad, and I think functionally that's possible, right? I think it has the hardware capabilities, and I even think that the interface, because you can use a mouse, like if you can use a keyboard and a mouse, you can use Final Cut. So I feel like we look at it and we're like, yeah, the way they look at it is like all the people who are serious about Final Cut are doing it on a Mac, and all the people who just want to put together videos just use this other stuff that we have on there already. So
iMovie,
I don't
whatever.
know.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep complaining about it until they do it. Hopefully one day.
You should.
We'll see. We'll see. Jason, thanks so much for sharing your review with us. We'll put a link to your iPad Pro and iPad 10th generation review in the show notes. You also just rebranded your podcast, the Undigital Podcast. We'll put a link to that as well. Where else would you like to point people?
Oh, you can just send me all of the things you disagree with me on Twitter. Just at Jason Aten. I mute them also, but please keep them coming.
You don't mute me because I say
that's true.
I try to be. Well, I think you are contrary to me at times. I think that's what happens.
I think all the time. There are times when I'm like, Stephen and I have never met in person, so I really hope he understands.
I understand at this point. I see a very snarky response and disagreement. I say, yeah, okay, Jason, I see. That's fine. And one day. One day we'll meet like Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and doing the arm wrestle just right in the air.
Oh, I can't. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, well, thanks so much, Jason. We'll put links to Jason's Twitter and the review that he did and his podcast in the show notes. Of course, you can follow the Apple Insider Show, tweet at myself at Stephen Robles. That'll be in the show notes as well. Support the show, get early access and an ad-free version in Apple Podcasts directly or patreon.com/AppleInsider. And a 5-star review gets you a shout out at the beginning of the show. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.